Hey all, and welcome back to a special episode building an iconic scene from The Simpsons, the Kwik-E-Mart. This is a highly recognisable location in the Simpsons universe, so what better way to immortalise it than to build a really cool diorama so that I can look at it every time I sit at my desk. It's only a small diorama, perfect to place on a desk or a shelf. It measures 22 by 21 centimetres, and it will definitely grab the attention of anyone over the age of 35 with nostalgia. In the first episode of the series, I build the Simpsons house, mostly using 3D printed parts. In episode 2, I laser cut Ned Flanders' house using acrylic and a CO2 laser cutter. In this episode, I'm again laser cutting most of the build with some additional 3D printed details. However, I'll be using a diode laser cutter and thin plywood. So hopefully you'll see what can be achieved with the different types of materials. The laser cutter I'm using is the S1 designed by xTool. They graciously sponsored this video, so if you want to check them out and see all the other laser cutters they have, you will find a link in the description. This is an extremely capable laser cutter and can do more than I can ever hope to achieve with this machine. It's got all the basics for anyone just getting started in laser cutting, but it also has all the professional capability for even the most experienced makers. The kit comes with everything you need to get started, including the air assist and honeycomb tray. The instructions are fantastic, well written and very easy to understand. You will have no trouble working this machine even if it's your first time. All the tools are included, so you are ready to put this together straight from the box. And there is a material testing kit so you can try various materials to see what works for you. While this is not a tutorial on actually setting up and using this particular laser cutter, I will briefly go over the basic steps as it's very straightforward and quick. Once the shipping bolts are removed, the laser gantry can be slid forward. The laser head is connected to the power and the air assist and slides into the mount. Two small screws hold it in place and the autofocus snaps into position magnetically. To improve the ventilation, the included duct is attached so I can route the air outside and avoid breathing in any fumes. The power cable is plugged in and the operation key installed. This is more for schools and public spaces, so only someone with the key can operate the machine. For me, I just leave it in permanently. The air assist hose is attached to the standalone unit, and the other end of the hose is connected to the appropriate spot on the back of the laser cutter. Power for the air assist also comes from the rear of the laser cutter machine via a USB-C connection. Once the honeycomb tray is in, it's ready to go. It also comes with these clever little magnetic clamps. With the material placed inside the machine, these clamps slip down between the honeycomb structure and hold down firm with the magnets. As for material, I'm using a 2mm plywood sheet. Although it says 2mm, it's actually much closer to 1.5 when checking with some calipers, which is actually just perfect for the scale I'm working in. To make thicker sheets of plywood, I laminated two panels together using some wood glue. These sheets worked out to be roughly 3mm thick and work out just the right thickness for the cinder block brick wall that I'll be cutting out a little bit later. Just make sure to weigh it down with some heavy weights as the glue dries so that you end up with a nice perfectly flat sheet. Now with the laser cutter turned on, we can start working with the xTool Creative Space. This is the software that connects to the S1 laser cutter. There is a small learning curve in using the Creative Space, however it's very intuitive and easy to pick up. I recommend watching a couple of basic tutorials on using the program to pick up the basics. Some really cool features are the laser head real-time positioning, so you can see exactly where it's positioned inside the laser cutter. It also has autofocus by dropping a small probe that lowers to determine the perfect distance for focusing the laser head. You can also mark out the material position. Simply select the method you want. I'm using a big flat square panel, so I only need to mark the two opposite corners. That way you'll know exactly where your material is inside the laser cutter, and you can position each cut perfectly. The model itself was built and designed using Tinkercad. I won't go through the process as I've shown it many times in previous videos, However, for patrons, the SVG files will be available in the patron members area of my website for those wanting to have a go at building this project. Once everything is positioned and aligned, the project is sent to the laser cutter. As for power settings, the Creative Workspace has preset values, or you can set your own values after doing some test cuts, which is what I did for the 1.5mm plywood. Now we just press the button on the front of the laser cutter to start the cut and watch our model start to come to life. It's a 40-watt laser, so it has no trouble cutting through 1.5mm plywood very fast. After several minutes, our entire building is cut out and ready for assembly. You could even produce a number of these kits to sell if you want to make a bit of money on the side using a laser cutter like this. I also cut a base for the diorama using the same 1.5mm plywood. It's just a basic square pattern with notches so that it fits together nice and snug. The main building, and for most of the assembly, I use Super Tack glue. It's a good glue for paper and wood as it grabs really fast so the project can keep moving forward without having to wait hours for the glue to dry. Overall, it's quite a basic kit to put together. It's basically a box with some extra detail. Like a lot of modern building these days. Some tools that will certainly help are squares and machinist blocks. A good tool for any model builder. The roof doesn't have a lot of internal support, so to help give it some strength, after placing the rooftop inside, I glue it down with a very liberal amount of glue. The hope is the glue will give it enough strength to hold for many years to come. Plus, the roof is going to be removable, so it needs to have a little bit of strength. Even the Kwik-E-Mart sign is laser cut, as well as the dumpster enclosure. Some of the tabs were protruding ever so slightly. That was an easy fix with a bit of sanding. Most of them have been designed to be hidden from view anyway. To get rid of some of the wood grain texture, I use a primer filler. This goes on and fills some of the tiny wood grain textures and lines in the material. Once dry, a very light sanding is done to smooth the sides and get that nice perfect finish. Depending on how much wood grain there is, you may need 2 or 3 coats to get a nice smooth finish. For some of the larger gaps, you can use wood filler, or as I'm doing here, I'm using some 3D printer resin. Once the resin is dipped into the gap, it gets cured with a UV torch and then sanded back so that it sits flush with the surface. 3D printer resin sands really well. You just want to avoid inhaling the resin dust. Now for painting. When it comes to the footpath and road, I'm using my tried and true technique. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you'll have seen this before. Basically, I use Woodland Scenic cement acrylic paint in the airbrush as the base colour, followed by a speckled layer of darker grey-green colour. Again using the airbrush, however the pressure is turned very low, so that the paint comes out speckled and splatters a little bit. Then a second layer of the cement colour is applied to blend it all together. Finally, an oil wash of Starship Filth is applied, removing the excess with a paper towel to give it a mottled look. The same technique is actually used for the cinder block wall as well, except I use a slightly different colour so that it stood out a little bit from the footpath. The parking lot is an old method I've been using for a while as well, starting with Rust-Oleum grey primer, followed by a misting of heirloom white to get the textured look, and then finish up with an acrylic black-brown wash. Liberally applied, and excess is removed with a paper towel to give a mottled look just like we did on the footpath. I don't use an oil wash here because the thinner used to thin the oil reacts with the spray paint. Painting the main building was a bit of trial and error. Getting the right colours was just a bit of a guess. I tried a few different colours until I found a colour that seemed to match close. I mostly use the airbrush to paint. It allows me to get a very nice even coat of paint with no brush marks. An airbrush is one of the most highly recommended tools, and you can find them pretty cheap these days. The cheap ones are really good if all you need to do is paint buildings and structures. As for the roof, once painted a brown roofy colour, I give it a coat of Tamiya flat clear. This is to prevent paint rubbing off when I need to take the roof on and off. I actually gave the entire building a coat of flat clear to help seal and protect the paint. Now for the windows. This is some clear plastic packaging. Any thin clear packaging should work okay. Thinner stuff works a little bit better. Once cut to size, I make sure to also cut the opening for the sliding doors. This will be recessed a bit, which is why it needs to be cut out. To mount the glazing, I use liquid PSA. This stuff is great for applications like this. Once applied, let it dry for a few minutes or until it goes clear, and then simply press the window into position. And that's it. It stays tacky, so if you do need to remove the window, pulling it away won't tear and damage the main building structure. As for the sliding door, I use a small 1mm piece of styrene to help recess the door back from the main window. Then I use a few drops of super tack glue to permanently hold it in position. The rooftop was a bit hard to airbrush, so in this case it was easier and more practical to use a paintbrush. It made it much easier to get in and under the small overhanging sections. As for the detail along the roof sides, I just used a felt tip marker to add these. It looked good, however the felt tip marker did not want to dry after several hours of waiting, so I covered the roof a second time with Tamiya flat clear so those lines wouldn't smudge. Now for the signs. These were printed on paper to size and then stuck to the signboard with spray adhesive. It is attached to the side of the roof with some super tack glue, doing my best to line it up straight. Additional details from here on were 3D printed, like Apu, which is a model I purchased from Colts 3D, and some other details I made using Tinkercad. Before getting too much further, I decided to add a touch of weathering. It's only a very light amount just to give a hint of dirt and grime. The good thing to note is because we gave everything a coat of Tamiya flat clear, the paint job is protected, so if you accidentally go a little bit too heavy with the weathering, it's easy enough to clean it off with some isopropyl alcohol and start again. Just don't rub it down too hard because the alcohol can eventually rub through the flat clear, and water is not really strong enough to get the powders off. And I almost forgot the parking lines. There's a bit of a trick to painting yellow lines. I first start by masking the lines to be painted. Then I use flat clear as an initial coat. This helps prevent any paint bleeding under the masking tape later. The second coat is a coat of white primer. This means that when we do apply the yellow, it will show through much clearer. Without the white, you'll need so many coats of yellow, it's borderline impractical. And ideally it would be better to mask and paint these lines before doing the weathering, because the masking tape will end up removing a bit of the weathering powder. I just forgot about these lines until now. Details like these payphones is easier to place and position before gluing the building onto the base. Just a couple of details on the rooftop make such a big difference. Now we can fix the building in place. I only used just enough glue to hold it down, just in case I need to pry it away from the base later in the future or for whatever reason. Once the building is down, the other small details like the bike rack, as well as the tiny milk crates, which to be honest I was surprised that they printed so well and look great. Also the car park bumpers and the dumpster, they bring the place alive so much. Not to mention the interior window signs. They just have a quick misting of spray adhesive over the front so they stick to the inside of the window glazing. The Alberto graffiti is handwritten with a felt pen. It's not perfect, but it still looks okay. Now this is a tool I haven't used in a very long time, the Chop It. When it comes to details like chain link fences, I still make them the old-fashioned way. It's just hard to beat how good it looks. I have 2 entire separate videos showing 2 different methods for making these fences. I go right into depth, and I highly recommend them if you want to make great looking chain link fences. I was planning to attach these to the top of the wall, however after some test fitting, I found they look a lot better when attached to the back of the wall when viewed from the front. And we're almost done. The sides are lined with some thin black polypropylene, although you could paint it black as well. The plastic just looks a little bit more polished and smoother. I use some 5-min epoxy to fix the edges in place. Just make sure to roughly sand the back edge of the plastic because smooth, glossy plastic and epoxy resin really don't like sticking together. Now we just need a poo out the front and we're done. Don't worry, I have plans to film a separate video on doing the interior. Also, if you want to have a go at building this yourself, join me on Patreon. I'll make all the files I used free for Patreon members, and you'll be able to download them from my members area of the website. Also, if you want a better way of chatting with me and getting to know what I'm up to, I prioritize my Patreon members. There you'll be able to take part in the Patreon chats, and I make sure to get back to all my patrons. You can join for as little as $2, and it goes such a long way into helping the channel grow. I appreciate all the patrons that support me, and I hope to meet you over there to continue the discussion. Cheers, and thanks for watching.